Miyamoto Musashi never lost a duel. Not one. 63 documented single combats, and he walked away from every single one. But the most revealing thing about Musashi is not his record. It is the enemy he identified as the most dangerous opponent he ever faced. Not the fastest swordsman, not the strongest. The most dangerous opponent, he wrote, was the version of himself that wanted to win too badly. He called this state Nemeru, the drowsy mind, the condition in which desire for a specific outcome clouds perception of the actual situation in front of you. A warrior in Nemeru stops seeing what is there. He starts seeing what he wants to be there. And in that gap between reality and desire, Musashi wrote, every defeat he ever witnessed was born. 400 years later, a man named David sits at his desk on a Sunday evening in suburban Atlanta, 54 years old, senior engineer, 28 years at a defense contractor, 3 books on value investing on his shelf. He watched the dot-com crash take 40% of his father's retirement in 2002. He knows what a bubble looks like. He is about to buy NVIDIA at a price-to-sales ratio of 40 times. Not because his analysis says the valuation is justified. Because his colleague tripled his position in 18 months. Because the S&P 500 finished 2025 up 17%, driven almost entirely by AI names David does not own. Because every day that gap exists, it no longer feels like a missed return. It feels like evidence that he has fundamentally misread the world. David is not in Nemeru because he is stupid. He is in Nemeru because the market spent 2 years building the exact psychological conditions that produce it, and he was never taught to recognize it. That is what this video is about. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi describes the ideal state of the warrior before a duel as moon in muso. No design, no conception. The mind holding no fixed expectation of how the fight will unfold. Not because preparation is wrong, but because a fixed expectation is a blindfold. The warrior who has already decided what his opponent will do cannot see what his opponent is actually doing. The preconceived story overrides incoming reality. This is the precise mechanism behind FOMO at market tops. The AI story was not a fantasy. Between 2023 and the end of 2025, the Nasdaq 100 delivered returns that humiliated every skeptic. NVIDIA's full-year revenue reached $215.9 billion in 2025, up 65% year over year. The motley fool. The technology was real, the revenue was real, the transformation was real. Artificial intelligence was genuinely reshaping the global economy in ways that were visible and measurable. But by late 2025, something had separated from that reality. The Nasdaq 100 price-to-earnings ratio reached 38.2 times, approaching the all-time high recorded during the dot-com peak in 2000 and 57% above the historical median. Power drill. The story remained true. The price had moved past what the story could support. The FOMO investor cannot see this separation because the story has become his fixed expectation, his preconceived design. The technology is transformative, therefore the price is justified. The company grew 65% last year, therefore it will grow 65% next year. The rally has continued for 2 years, therefore it will continue for 2 more. Each extension feels like a logical inference. None of it is. All of it is Nemeru, the drowsy mind extending a true story past the point where truth ends and desire begins. Musashi's corrective was not skepticism, it was a specific practice. Before any engagement, strip the expectation. Ask not what you believe will happen, but what the situation in front of you actually shows. For David, that question is precise and uncomfortable. Not whether AI will transform the world, it will, but whether NVIDIA, at 40 times sales, purchased today, has a favorable expected return from this price forward. These are entirely different questions. FOMO collapses them into one. Musashi would not allow that collapse. The comparison that kills clarity. There was a second force operating on David, and Musashi diagnosed it with a single line in the Dakoto. The 7th precept, never be jealous, not a moral instruction, a strategic one. In Musashi's analysis, jealousy in combat, the destabilizing awareness that your opponent possesses something you do not, does something specific and lethal. It shifts your objective. You stop fighting your fight. You start fighting to close the gap between his position and yours. And the moment your objective changes from winning your fight to matching his position, you have surrendered the only advantage you actually had. Clarity about what your specific situation requires. David's colleague tripling his NVIDIA position is not information about what David's portfolio requires. It is information about his colleague's entry price, his risk tolerance, his tax situation, his time horizon, and, most critically, his exit plan. David has none of this. What he has is the scoreboard, the number. And because that number is visible, discussed at lunch, embedded in every headline, His brain converts underperformance into personal failure rather than a different strategy producing a different result. By late 2025, both retail and professional investor sentiment had reached levels that exceeded the average for most major market tops. An environment where risk was being discounted and investors were behaving as if there was no price too high. Medium. These were not unsophisticated people. These were professional managers, caught between what their analysis told them and what the social pressure of visible underperformance demanded. This is Musashi's jealousy problem at institutional scale. When the relevant question stops being, is this a good investment at this price, and becomes, can I tolerate continuing to miss this rally? The investor has already lost the duel, not to the market, to his own need to close the gap. Here is where the conventional prescription fails. Every behavioral finance book will tell David the same thing. Know your biases, develop discipline, stay rational under pressure, identify the FOMO, name it, resist it. The solution offered is always some version of better self-control, a cognitive upgrade that allows the rational mind to overpower the emotional one when it matters most. Musashi would reject this at the root. Not because self-awareness is useless, because Musashi understood something about the relationship between preparation and performance that most financial education never reaches. You cannot summon clarity in the moment of maximum pressure that you did not build before the pressure arrived. Trying to reason your way out of Nemaru while inside it is like trying to see clearly after the blindfold is already on. The moment for intervention is not during the duel. The moment is long before it. In the Book of Five Rings, Musashi is precise on this point. Not forgetting about the possibility of disorder in times of order, he was describing a practice, the deliberate regular act of imagining the bad outcome while conditions are good. Not pessimism, not paralysis. The specific cognitive work of making the downside real in your mind before the upside has made you Nemaru. Consider what David never did during 2 years of AI outperformance. He never sat down in a calm moment with his portfolio green and the news favorable and asked, what is the specific return profile of this asset if I buy it today at this valuation? Not the return it has produced. The return it is likely to produce from here. Those are entirely different numbers, and the multi-year rally had made them feel identical. Strategists entering 2026 anticipated elevated equity volatility, with the interplay of FOMO, conflicting AI narratives, and policy uncertainty creating conditions where tail risk hedging had become essential. A signal that the professionals were already pricing in the correction that FOMO buyers were refusing to imagine. Tiger, the smart money was not more disciplined in the moment. It had done different work before the moment arrived. And that is the twist that no amount of behavioral finance education delivers on its own. The solution to FOMO is not a better response to the feeling. It is a structural intervention that removes the decision from the moment when the feeling is loudest. Ketsu, the reconciliation. Musashi's 11th precept. In all things, have no preferences. This is consistently misread as indifference. Musashi was not indifferent. He was intensely focused on winning. What he was teaching is something more surgical. Do not let your preference for a specific outcome distort your perception of the actual situation. Do not want a rally to continue so badly that you stop asking whether the price you are about to pay is justified. Applied practically, this produces 3 specific disciplines. The first is separating thesis quality from entry quality, in writing, not in your head. The AI thesis can be completely correct, and the entry price can still be wrong. Amazon was right about e-commerce. Buying Amazon at $107 in 1999 was still a catastrophic error for anyone who could not hold through a 94% drawdown over 3 years. The thesis and the price are 2 separate analytical questions. FOMO merges them. Musashi's discipline keeps them apart. Before any position driven by the feeling of missing out, write both assessments separately. How strong is the thesis, and what does the current price imply about forward returns from here? The writing is not bureaucratic. It is the act of forcing the 2 questions apart before the feeling collapses them. The second is the pre-mortem, performed at the moment of maximum enthusiasm. Musashi prepared for every duel by imagining his own defeat, not to become fearful, but to close the gaps that fear would otherwise exploit in real time. For David, the practical version is this. The year is 2027. He bought NVIDIA at the top. The position is down 50%. Write down every reason that could explain what happened. Retail investors exposed to AI through ETFs had typically not differentiated between companies burning cash to fund AI infrastructure and those actually on the receiving end of AI spending, treating a unified narrative as a substitute for individual position analysis. CNBC, the pre-mortem forces that differentiation before the money moves, not after. The third is building the decision before the pressure exists. This is the deepest Musashi principle of the 3, and the one most directly derived from his concept of Fudoshin, the immovable mind. Fudoshin is not the suppression of emotion under pressure. It is the product of preparation thorough enough that pressure finds no gap to enter. The investor who decides, on a Sunday morning when markets are flat, exactly what conditions would justify a new position in a high momentum sector, what valuation threshold, what evidence of forward earnings support, what maximum portfolio concentration, is not restricting his upside. He is removing himself from the decision at the moment when he is least qualified to make it. David's problem was never intelligence. David's problem was that he arrived at a highly engineered emotional environment. 2 years of AI outperformance, visible comparison to peers, continuous media reinforcement of a true and compelling story with no prior structure to meet it. He was prepared for the asset class, but not for the psychology surrounding it. Musashi won his duels before he arrived at them. The preparation was where the outcome was decided. The actual moment of combat was, in his own description, merely the confirmation of work already done. Sharp sell-offs followed by rapid recoveries have characterized markets over the past 18 months, a pattern analysts expect to persist through 2026, with FOMO and bubble concerns operating simultaneously and creating the conditions where investors entering at peak enthusiasm bear the full cost of the correction while capturing none of the prior gains. Hi, Tiger. The next peak is being built right now. Every cycle produces one. Every cycle finds investors who knew better, who had read the books, who had watched the previous version of this story, buying near the top because the feeling of being left behind finally became intolerable. Musashi's question, the one he returned to throughout the Dokkodo and the Go-Rin no-show, is the only one that interrupts this cycle before it completes. Is the conviction I feel right now based on what I actually see, or on what I desperately want to be there? The difference between those two things is not always visible in the moment. It is always visible in the preparation that precedes it.